what is going on in the United States with sperm quality and fertility? Are we reproducing as well as we used to, or is there a difference? And if there is a difference in sperm quality, what is the cause of it, and what is the logical conclusion of what's going to happen over the next 25 years?
I've published on this in the Journal of the American Medical Association and other places. First of all, the average male today has almost half the sperm that his grandfather had. Half that the grandfather had. And we know that from studies of military recruits. Those are men that come into the military that have been monitored. We get a sample of sperm. And so a colleague of mine once said that men today are half the men of their grandfather's age. But that's not a joke. It's not a joke at all. The website of the Cleveland Clinic on infertility advises that men who want to father healthy children get their phones out of their pocket. That's the website of the Cleveland Clinic. That is hardly left-wing fringe neurotic ideas, Steve. Okay? The Cleveland Clinic and all major fertility clinics around the world today have similar advice. And it's very interesting to me that when I was, my book came out in India, and as well as, I guess, a dozen other countries. It was the Indian infertility experts who first identified the problem of hip, thin Indian guys with 2 or 3 phones at their hips or on their pockets with lowered sperm count. And they did studies where they took sperm from healthy men and put them in 2 different test tubes. And the test tube that got exposed to cell phone radiation, those sperm died 3 times faster with 3 times more damage on the mitochondria of their DNA, which is the engine of the cell. This is very strong evidence that cell phone radiation can damage sperm. Now, other things damage sperm, including the pesticide DBCP. And men who were working with this pesticide for production of bananas and pineapples in Costa Rica and Ecuador were found to be sterile. And I wrote about this in my Smoke Ran Like Water book and also in The Secret History of the War on Cancer. I don't know if you have either of those books here. I don't think you do. But in those books, I wrote about this problem in a chapter called Save the Males. Because the males are endangered and they are exposed to solvents, and the so-called inert ingredients in pesticides can be much more toxic to sperm than the active ingredient, just as you said. And so we have a lot of evidence about what is causing the decline in male fertility. And a lot of the experts in this have identified pesticides and solvents and heavy metals as well as cell phone radiation. And that is why you find advice about avoiding those exposures to men who want to father healthy children. There's no question about it. There's also been, by the way, a decline in the birth of boys. The sex ratio at birth was 1.05 male to female. We don't understand exactly why, but it's historically believed to reflect a number of genetic properties of the X and Y chromosome. You know, women are XX, right? And men are XY, right? So the Y chromosome, if you'll hold this for a minute for me, the Y chromosome is missing a leg to stand on. And it may actually be weaker than the X chromosome that has 2 legs to stand on. Right? There actually is some evidence for this in genetics. And what we know is that all over the world in industrial countries, there's been a decline in the birth of baby boys relative to baby girls at birth. We don't know why fewer boys are being born. But this has been happening in all industrial countries for some time. It's certainly not cell phones only, but it certainly is one of the factors.
I have to tag on something you said when you said save the males. I kind of get a lump in my throat because I have a particular concern about boys, and that is that boys are afflicted with neurobehavioral and neurodevelopmental disorders at a much greater rate than girls. And right now, as I mentioned earlier, we have 1 in 40 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. That number is estimated to be about a ratio of 4 boys to every 1 girl diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. There are estimates, if you take the rates of growth of autism diagnoses over the last few decades and you project those growth rates forward, there are estimates that we will have 1 in 4 children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder by 2033. So if you think about the ratio of boys to girls, 4 to 1, for every 4 kids that get autism, 1 will be a girl, the rest will be boys. So by 2033, if we have 1 in 4 children with autism, how many boys won't have autism? That's the kind of thing that runs chills down my spine when I think about it. And the other thing, going back to your question about sperm and for infertility, I actually think that the chronic illness epidemic in our children begins at infertility. Infertility is the red flag. It's telling us that either the mom or the dad or both of them, their bodies don't want to reproduce. But what do? We do IVF, and we have all these amazing technologies to help our bodies reproduce when our bodies are not able to. And that, there's all kinds of research looking at the consequences of many of the fertility treatments, the drugs, the IVF, all these things that we do to try and support fertility in bodies that are not able to safely reproduce. So there is a real concern there, and Save the Males is such a great title because it is such a deep concern of mine. As a parent of a boy, as a parent of daughters, I just worry for how it's going to shape up a couple of decades down the road.
By the way, Deborah, do you feel that your fellow panelists are being a little extreme and exaggerating these points at all, or do you feel that they're completely accurate with the information?
I think on the autism story, it's even worse in the Black community. The rate is higher for young Black baby boys, as you know, and it is a real serious problem. I really don't, Steve. I think that you guys are doing a good job of highlighting things that are seldom talked about. This makes us all uncomfortable. It makes us all very uncomfortable. The society can be judged by how well it treats those who are unable to take care of themselves, how well it treats children and the elderly. And we're not doing a very good job because we have, on the other end of the spectrum, we have increased rates of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And more importantly, the thing I find very troubling, we have an earlier age of diagnosis of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, an earlier age of diagnosis. And that's also signaling that something's going on with our environment and our genes. And one of the things that we know from research I'll show tomorrow is that if you keep a phone next to your brain for 50 minutes, you change the amount of glucose in the part of the brain that's most exposed. That's another article from the Journal of the American Medical Association, done by the director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse with a brilliant study design. They put a helmet on somebody, on several people, and they did a PET scan, and they had phones on both sides, and the person wearing the phones did not know if the phone was turned on. It was simply turned on. It wasn't playing music, it wasn't doing anything. And the signal being on next to the brain, what does it do? Well, it's smart. So 900 times a minute, it goes to the tower. Where are you? Here I am. It's a handshake, electromagnetic handshake. Where are you? Here I am. And because it's close, half of the radiation from the phone gets into the brain. And it gets in, just about 2 inches to the adult brain, and by the way, almost through the brain of a baby. Okay? And after 50 minutes, they did a PET scan, and they showed a significant increase in glucose in the brain. Well, guess what Alzheimer's has been called? Diabetes of the brain. Because there's too much glucose in the brain. And that's where you hear about, and of course there are things like grains that contribute, the brain grain, et cetera. But the fact is, I think that this is another one of the avoidable causes, and this is another end of for the elderly that we have to be aware of. And this may also, there are reports, I don't know if you have any on yours, of people with dementia that has been stabilized or reversed with certain interventions. Do you have any of that in your website yet? But I think I'll try to connect you with some people who've done that work. Some of them come out of functional medicine, like a neurologist in
Dr.
Florida.
Dale Bredesen's doing
Yes,
research.
that book is incredible. Well, actually, do you know about it? You could tell them a little bit about that work.
Yeah, actually, I met Dr. Bredesen a few years ago, and I was telling him about my tumor, and he said, what you did was you changed your epigenetics by making lifestyle shifts, and that's what he's doing with Alzheimer's, that he is putting people on pure food and water and taking out all the toxins, and he's finding a tremendous reversal of Alzheimer's, where people, they're shocked because they didn't. Current knowledge seems to be, well, it's irreversible, but he's seeing that it is reversible by making lifestyle shifts. Dale Bredesen, Bredesen.
Doesn't he also advocate a slightly modified paleo diet?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I looked at it, it's a diet that has no artificial sugars, no added sugars except for stevia, and I think xylitol. But it's very, very much, like you say, pure food, but a little bit heavy toward the paleo side, not just vegan, which I know doesn't fly with some of the ideas that you may have here, Steve. But in fact, they had shown extraordinary outcomes of people who were unable to walk on their own and couldn't find their car keys and couldn't function, restored to functionality. So it's an extraordinary series of stories. I think it'd be, the other end you might want to add to.
Right, his book is on the New York Times bestseller now. I think it's called The End of Alzheimer's, is the name of it.